Well, we decided that we're gonna start this conversation with a heavy subject, which we always do, which is about the pandemic that we're all living in right now and how that's given us a collective reminder and a greater awareness of mortality. Um, so why don't you start us on that, Masih? Like your thoughts?
Sure. So I think so maybe to give a bit of a backdrop on this topic was the one for my last podcast episode. Um, and when I was trying to kind of put together everything that I'm experiencing, that I've been seeing, um, what came to mind for me was this notion of being more present with mortality. And what I mean by that is literally being closer to death. And a lot of the systems and structures that we enjoy, especially in developed countries, um, is this kind of buffer from or separation from our potential, like just dying. And what this pandemic I found kind of did was it kind of showed how fragile we really are, despite all of these things that we've set up. And when you bring, when you come right to the face of it, um, it unleashes a lot of energy in a lot of ways. Um, and a lot of it can be constructive, positive energy, a lot of changes that we're seeing in our working lives, in our relationships, things that were not like 4 months ago. If you were to mention any of these things or how, for example, how possible remote work would be or how, you know, feasible it is, people would have, a lot of managers would have said, no, it's for this X, Y, and Z reason we can't do it. But now because this pandemic has happened, we've kind of accelerated uh, a lot of things, and not just at the economic level, but a lot of different levels. So that's kind of the starting point for this discussion. And kind of when Milo and I were talking about this in our secret one-on-one before this, so it was an exclusive one-on-one, but this is the inclusive one-on-one. We were talking about kind of how that this manifests at different levels. So, and I think Milo had some interesting comments that she shared with us, that she shared with me. If you want to talk on that, kind of what came to mind when I brought up this idea of mortality.
Um, for the record, for anybody who doesn't know, my nickname is Milo, and that's what a lot of people.
Oh yes.
Just putting it out there, before we start looking for one of those drinks like bobbing around. Um, well, I think, I mean, for me personally, I think that this pandemic has brought on a lot of reflection as to, like how to live life and whether it's living in the moment or planning for the future, but how do you really plan for the future? And when you think of future, you always think of this sense of you're moving towards, like the end, right? Like you're always just moving forward. You know that the circle of life is going to come from start to finish. But right now, it feels like that end point could be anywhere. You could walk out the door and that could be it, right? And I think that kind of sense of paranoia and overwhelming sense of not knowing like where your life's going or whether any plans that you've had are going to work out or not. I think that um, that to me has brought on like a lot of reflection of mortality, and given that
Mm-hmm.
I'm here sitting in Toronto and my parents are in India and my friends and family are all over the place and I've had only virtual connections with them and that's the only way of me actually knowing
Mm,
if they're okay or not, it is.
yeah.
I mean, I'm very grateful to technology for bringing us closer in this time, and also for conversations like this where we can just openly be honest about our fears and paranoias and um, how terrifying it is. Like even being indoors right now, like you don't feel safe because it's like you don't know what could be the reason which
Yeah.
sends you towards your endpoint. None of us are expecting it. Everybody's trying to take care of themselves, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There was one of the things that really stood out to me is it's kind of shown us this realization, but on another level, it was always there. Like we were always this close to death. We're always this close. And there's this story of this dervish story from a book by Idris Shah, Tales of the Dervishes. A dervish is like a mendicant or a holy man. And there's a very good story that I'd like to share at some point. It's not too long. Ursh just had a comment here. The pandemic really had me slow down and reevaluate my wants and needs. And it's so strange how busy we make ourselves in the day-to-day, a distraction from ourselves.
Oh no, 100%.
That's a really powerful point.
100%.
Yeah.
I feel, honestly, a lot of people that I've spoken to, and I feel like that's the majority of my time for the past over 100 days has been that, like trying to connect with people and see how they're doing. Is the fact that for a lot of people it's slowed down. For me, I feel like everything's just picked up, and I'm a workaholic, so I feel like everything's moved on to that level of it's shot through the roof, and I'm just doing that. But I think definitely I agree with you, Ursh. Like it's a total reevaluation of even something as basic as, what food do I want? What can I live without? And what am I fine, like, just eating over and over? Or, what do I actually need? Like your core needs, I feel, because I think we live in that kind of world where we're just used to just getting, like everything, like you can order something like that, like whether it's clothes, books, food, and we've come to a point where we have to be like, okay, like what do we need? Like what do we actually need? What do we want in our houses? And what actually contributes to our like daily wellness, not even like an overall wellness, but like mental peace and just being, just being in that moment with yourself. Like what do you actually need? What do you think?
Well, I think that that's exactly it, right? And I found myself, I was in my second semester at the time, when things were really starting to shut down, and we had assignments due, and I'm just in the middle of this assignment, like, what the hell am I doing? Like, what am I actually doing right now? Why am I doing this? It just felt insincere to be focusing energy on something like this when all of this is going on around me. And I find that, when you have this kind of this awareness, it's like, I think it's powerful to, again, realize that it's always there. It's just abstracted. It's like if you go traveling for the first time and you come back home, you start to rediscover parts of your home that you never experienced before, because you start to see, like when you go traveling, you're looking at and you're in a different country, you're seeing the infrastructure, you're noticing all the little details and patterns, and you're like, wow, this is incredible. And you're noticing the different smells and sights, and ways of being. But when you come back home, at least in my experience, I found that I'm starting to re-see things that I've kind of relegated to the background or to the periphery, or I've kind of blinded myself out on. And that's a metaphor for the relationships in our lives that I think a lot of us are starting to re-see the value, the deep value of, and spending time with each other. I know my partner, Anika, she's really made an effort to connect with friends and family. And even the statistics show that park usage, just based off like Google Maps frequencies, hotspot charts, people are spending a lot more time in parks. People are spending a lot more time outdoors. I think mostly because we've been isolated from that, not having been able to go outside as much, but also to be like with friends and family and in nature. So yeah, it really has that kind of awakening effect. And I think it's also like one of the other things that I mentioned in the podcast is, it's kind of shown us what's possible. Like the whole world mobilized to solve this, to deal with this, to organize, to make sure the vaccine's accessible. And in some of the work that I do, this is exactly what we're doing. We're organizing calls with international development ministers to focus on COVID-19 and how we can build back better and make sure nobody is left behind. But there's other. It begs the question: why don't we move with this same urgency for other issues? Just last year, 10 million people fell ill because of another pandemic, but nobody's heard about that, and that's tuberculosis. You know, but why haven't we heard about it? Well, this isn't in developing countries. It's not as much of an issue in richer countries. 1.7 million people were newly affected with HIV, newly affected in 2018, and 770,000 people died. There are 228 million cases of malaria and 400,000 deaths in 2018. And these are all lethal. These like, if we look at the numbers, you know, they cause harm, they debilitate people's lives, they take family members away. But whose families are they taking away from? You know, that's the question. And because we've seen how the world can react when we take something seriously and we prioritize it and we value it, because we see it for what it is, it shows what's possible, which I think is so beautiful. That ability to reimagine what's possible. And we need to carry that forward for issues that maybe we don't necessarily feel right away, because there's, again, that buffer, that separation between us and it. But it's really right around the corner.
I mean, Ursh is saying that it makes you reflect on what those in power see as important, like homelessness, anti-Black racism, what's happening in Kashmir, Muslims in China. I mean, et cetera, is, I think, the most accurate thing, you know, because there's so many issues out there that don't get, like, the spotlight that they deserve, you know. And in the past few days, I 100% agree with you. In the past few days, I've just been, like, going through so much content of what people are posting, and there's so many things that I didn't know about, and I try to at least stay in the loop between family and friends all over about what's going on, like the major highlights, even if I can't go in depth with everything. And there's so many things that, you know, have been going on for so long, and there's no, like, I feel like the value on life, like, for like those in power, you know, I think that's something. I hope that this global, like, situation changes that, you know, the value that people have given to individual lives, no matter where they are in the world, you know. So speaking of, like, you know, you were talking about whether it's traveling or going to developing countries and stuff like that. You've worked both in Ukraine and in Jordan, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Sure. So I mean, I migrated from Afghanistan. I was born in Kabul, in Afghanistan, in 1996, and we migrated when I was just 4 years old, so in 2000, and we were extremely fortunate to come to Canada. And I haven't traveled to any country since, apart from the US for a weekend for basketball, but I haven't been on vacation. I haven't been anywhere since then. And the first time that I really left Canada and really like the GTA was in 2018 when I went to Jordan. And I went there for 3 months. It was for a practicum for my undergraduate degree. We have a 3-month practicum component. And I got to work there with a non-governmental organization that provides medical services for refugees. They work for the UN Refugee Agency as kind of the frontline people. And I went there with one of my best friends, with Sharif Hadid, great guy, for those that know him. And me and him, like, we went there, and it was also his first time back. He's from Iraq. And it was just a mind-blowing experience because for the first time I'd blended in. Still not quite, because I'm not Arab, I don't speak Arabic, but I'd almost lost this kind of, like, uniqueness to my identity that I hadn't realized up until that point. And there's a strange comfort in blending in, but also like a feeling like you lost something. Now, the most eye-opening experience for me there was we were doing some surveys for some of the patients at a clinic at Zatari refugee camp. So this refugee camp is about 2 hours away from Amman, the capital city. It's like in the middle of the desert on a one-way road. There's armored vehicles machine guns, people like guarding the entrances. There's like these huge dunes that are about 2.5 people high and down, and concrete walls with barbed wire on top that kind of span the horizon. And this refugee camp houses about 80,000 people, mostly, I believe, women and children, elderly people with disabilities. The majority of refugees tend to live outside of refugee camps, um, and they don't let you out, and they don't let you in easily either. You know, and when I walked into the clinic, me and Sharif, like the first thing that I really felt was just, and it was a full clinic, was just the weight of the eyes on me, because I look like everyone else, but my clothes are clean, I can speak English fluently, and I can leave. And it was the first time that I had really felt a part of my Canadianness come out, whatever that's called, whatever that is, whatever label you put on it. It's just that the privilege that comes with being able to leave, but still, and then the contradiction with looking like everybody else, and like, and very much similar cultures, between Arabs and Afghans. And we heard a lot of like really sad stories from the survey that we were administering. We were seeing how people were being received in the clinic, and a lot of, it was so sad to see, because people really were grateful for these services they are being provided. But there are children there that have grown up their whole lives in this refugee camp. Like, I saw them just playing outside with a soccer ball while guarded by these watchtowers so that they don't leave. And this is their whole world. This is their reality. And this settlement was created in 2011, and it's still open till this day. Um, it's actually jokingly like one of the largest settlements in Jordan. And there's a lot of them like this, and they're denied access to basic rights, citizenship, the opportunity to work. I was playing basketball with a guy who could speak English fluently, Arabic fluently, French fluently, had his medical degree, was Syrian, but he wasn't allowed to work. And it's just, so it's heartbreaking, because it's so frustrating, when you see that and you feel like you're part of that. And I know I'm kind of rambling here, but when I went to Ukraine, um, that was more recent. I just got back in August of 2019, and I went in February of 2019. So about 6 months I was there. And being a brown man in Ukraine, that's an interesting experience, because so I was in the capital city, Kiev, and there's a lot of migrants from Central Asia with histories of Russian colonialism and back and forth movement of people and goods that predates the Soviet Union as well. But I had encountered a lot of Central Asians who, again, look a lot like me. Now, I can be seen as, one, a student from one of these countries who's here studying. Two, I could be seen as an illegal migrant who normally works in like the shawarma huts that they have set up, or as a rich like Arab like businessman who's here to do business. And I think it was very confusing, because I didn't fall into any of these categories. So I was always received strangely walking into like restaurants or whatever. And there was actually this one guy who worked in the underground tunnels in the subway station there. And he was working in a shawarma hut, and he didn't speak English, and I don't speak Russian, but we spoke Farsi together. And we connected, and it was so bizarre, because a lot of the slang that we were using was the same, and he was the same age as me. And this was one of the most eye-opening experiences for me, because he was born in Tirmiz, which is across the border in Tajikistan. I think it's in Tajikistan, or I think it might be in Uzbekistan, I'm not sure. But it's just across the border to the north of Afghanistan. And I was born in Kabul. Now, we were born in such close proximity with very similar life outcomes. Perhaps in Kabul it was far worse at the time. If we're looking at life expectancy for a newborn baby, we were probably born in the same year. Now, what course of actions, events had to come into place for me to be granted these unbelievably better opportunities, and for him to have to work 12 hours, 7 days a week at this shawarma hut, making what I made in a month on an internship there in a year. Um, and I think that was one of the most eye-opening experiences for me, kind of being in 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 Ukraine. And my word for that is like hyphenation, and kind of existing in the hyphen between identities. You know, being Afghan in Canada, Canadian in Afghanistan, both and neither, always the other. And you kind of exist in the middle. You're never quite at home anywhere, and like in any place. Um, but I think that that's a ubiquitous experience, and I think already you can definitely relate to that. You know, yourself having lived in so many different places, and kind of, you know, who you are not being a reflection of the place, but kind of the the essence that you've extracted from all these places and your unique corner of the universe with that. So I think if you want to share that, like what your reflections are on that.
I mean, I think for any of us, look, I know what you mean, because though I haven't been through the kind of journey that you have, and I respect that. Like, I respect the journey that you've been through, both personally and also um like, I know when you returned from both from Jordan and from Ukraine, like it was something that we discussed to extent, you know, the question of identity and the things that you've seen and the things that the collective experience of being there, you know, with the people. You're with them, but you're not. You're part of it, but you look the same, but you're not the same, um, and also
Mm-hmm.
perception, right? Like, of like who people think you are versus who you think you are, and when you come back from all that, like into what you call your own space, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's your home or my home, and you just sit there and think, and you can't even answer it for yourself, like that kind of question of who you are. um, and I think that that comes down to not even, like, you know, we think it's something big. We think it's something that only tragedy, like looking at tragedy or loss can show you. But I think it's just, if you step back for a second and just look at your experience for like X amount of years, you know, on this planet, that, you know, how much you are a part of things, but you are not, you know, like in any space. Especially as a person of color, like I feel like we don't realize that sometimes because of the people that we surround ourselves with, you know, um, and what we've been through. I think for me, I'm South Asian by birth. I grew up in the Middle East, then went back to India for boarding school, which again and feels very strange to me, because even though I studied in India, I don't feel like I studied in India, because my some of my closest friends were South Korean, and, you know, or had grown up in the US, or um, and but we were all in our way different. Like, we all looked like, majority everybody, quote unquote, like South Asian, we all looked the same, but clearly the way we
Mm.
talked, the way we ate, the way we behaved was totally different, and how we perceived what was going on around us was totally different. And then from there, coming here to
Mm-hmm.
Canada, like for me, I felt somehow like I belonged here in Canada, even though like it's a majority, like, you know, white country in that sense. But I felt, no, like I could find the groove very easily, you know. And I think that that attests to the fact that, you know, we went to a university and we lived in a kind of community that was inclusive in that sense, you know. So I never felt like the other. So it never actually hit me. So when people started asking me these questions about, oh, like, but, you know, you're a woman of color, you know, like, how has your journey been? It didn't, like, until like that question was asked to me for the first time, like it never actually hit me. um like, even where I
Mm-hmm.
work right now, like I deal with neither issue, because my boss, who's my mentor, um is a woman of color, you know, and but is also Canadian. And so it's um
Hmm.
I think the question of identity, especially right now, given the pandemic that we're going through and who we are, I think is a major subject because I don't know about you because most of my all my interactions, not even most, all my interactions with people at this point have been virtual. Um, so I feel like
Hmm. Hmm.
sometimes I feel like I'm a different person on screen and different person off screen, and um, like I think after this passes, well, hopefully it'll pass soon, because I feel like I need humans around me again. It's like I don't know how that's going to change like my perception of reality or my perception of other people. Um, and
Yeah.
like I don't know. We've talked about it. Like, why don't you share your thoughts on like this idea of like this facade that we create virtually?
Maybe I can, just before I guess I answer that, maybe if I can open it to people participating right now, if you kind of want to share like kind of like a reflection or maybe a question, that you've kind of something that's kind of happened to you that you're experiencing during this pandemic that's changed the way that you think, or that's challenged the way that you normally do things, or maybe
Yeah.
something that you've seen for the first time. It doesn't have to be remarkable or epic,
No, it could be anything.
but
It
just
could be like
something
a
like a.
simple
Mhm.
thing that you notice when you wake up or before you go to bed. I mean, we'd love to hear
Mhm.
that from you. Um, any reflections, any
Yeah,
thoughts, whether now or through
yeah,
this
absolutely.
call. Any questions, any thoughts? Like, this is a conversation, and you're equally part of it.
So to answer your question, Milo, uh, I have a group of kind of young students slash professionals that we organize, and every week we do these innovation calls. And what we try to do is we try to imagine what the world will be like in the future. And we try to like imagine, okay, how can we prepare for that? What's something that we can do to better uh, to create a better world moving forward? And one of the things when we're talking about virtual connection, right? One of the things that we were talking about was this idea of, you know, what is the family unit going to look like? What is the future of the family moving forward? I mean, a lot of it is already virtual with, grandparents yelling into the, phone to make sure, hey, how are you? Da, 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 da. Like that was huge, like it connected us across
Mm-hmm.
continents. Um, but moving forward, like when it comes to, our need to like see people, our need to be with people, there's an emptiness that comes with the screen. Um, Rahin here mentioned,
I'm noticing there's a
uh,
growing sense of community coming from this collective struggle that we are going through.
mhm,
200%.
yeah, I really like
Like
that.
I think that's brought a lot of hope to a lot of people around the world, and there's so many people who stepped up, and stepped out of the box to be there for their communities and be there for their neighbors, their like strangers, like handing out things to, like, my mom is in the social work sector in India, and she's been telling me these great stories about how people made food to hand out to migrant workers who were walking home, like across states for days and days and days. And um, I mean, it gives me like so much hope. There's hope for humanity, is what I feel from all these stories that I hear.
I hear that.
Yeah.
Love you,
Yes.
Ghazi.
Love you.
Um,
And
um,
also,
Ursh says, much easier to contextualize what's absolutely necessary and what's not. Um, Interesting, like I guess that domain of like what we need and what we don't need, kind of bringing it back. Do you want to share this one,
yeah,
Milo?
and also an example of effective leadership versus ineffective leadership. Truly, truly, I feel like we've all um, it's a stark reality that I think we've all had to face, no matter where we are in the world at this point.
Yeah, it's difficult to see. I mean, on the international affairs angle, like we kind of seeing the way that different states are reacting and a lot of the insular thinking, looking inwards, not really, sometimes in some cases undermining other countries. It just shows that when you're fighting like a pandemic that doesn't give a doesn't give two shits about borders, doesn't care about your border control systems, it'll move across. They're slippery. They sneak through, you know? Um, our way of responding has to match that. And what we're seeing is right now quite the opposite. And I mean, things are starting to change where there's more international cooperation at this stage than there was at the beginning when everybody was scrambling. But it goes to show that more and more the irrelevance of like of countries and the nation state and the way that it's organized. Um, and it's scaring the people a lot from like wanting to, connect with other, like open up our borders. Well, if these pandemics are happening, we should close things off. We should bring manufacturing back to our own countries so we don't have to rely on country X or country Y. Because what if they screw us over? There's that, and that comes down to a lack of trust and a sense of separation, en masse. And I mean, Trump is ludicrous, right? Like we just the things that we're seeing coming out of there. It's just like, what is going on? Shout out to all those K-pop fans who are like trolling all his events and stuff.
Well, I think Ursh was saying something about I think women lead so much better than men, like Jacinda Ardern versus other presidents and their handling of COVID. I feel like this is more up your alley.
You're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at Angela Merkel, if you look at Jacinda Ardern, I believe you're referring to New Zealand's head of state and the way that they've handled it. Things are opening up far more. If you look at the leadership, perhaps not the national, but subnational level in British Columbia, for example, Dr. I forget her name, but the chief medical officer in BC, for all the different challenges that they had with enormous amounts of migration to different countries, particularly East Asian countries, and very densely populated cities, and kind of the early onset of the disease. By all counts, they should have had it the worst. But because of early decisive action by a woman in charge, they were able to have the lowest rate of COVID-19 infections. And they also didn't police COVID-19. They didn't say, we're going to give you a ticket, we're going to fine you, we're going to jail you, we're going to do X, Y, and Z to you. Millions of dollars have actually been made. Don't quote me on that, but I heard that in passing, from COVID-19 fines across Canada.
Mm-hmm.
But BC didn't have to do that. They also raised the wage of personal support workers, PSWs, in long-term care centers, $4 right from the get-go, no hesitation, because they were seen as, they have to work multiple jobs. My mom's a long-term nurse. This is what she's been telling me for the last 10 years. They have to work multiple jobs at different facilities in order to support themselves and their families. So they automatically become a major risk because they have to go from workplace to workplace. She saw that right away. She's like, okay, $4 per hour raise, only work at one place. And because of that quick, decisive action, none of this, they are our heroes. We need to show them how much we appreciate them symbolically, but not when it comes to pay, not when it comes to policy, not when it comes to like social protections. We're seeing that, and she didn't have to enforce anything. And there's something to show for Germany's approach. There's something to show for New Zealand's approach, Vancouver's approach, and versus other places.
Rahin Barani says, when I started volunteering at a food bank and delivering medication and groceries, I was shocked by just how many people are open to volunteering their time and resources for helping others. And in many ways, COVID has renewed his faith in humanity and human compassion. I can't agree with you more. I was definitely losing my faith in humanity for a long time, and seeing this, I feel like my faith is renewed in so many ways. So much respect to you for volunteering and going out there and doing this, Rahin. But then we have, that's actually my teacher from boarding school, who says, and I also realized I prefer face-to-face teaching to the online version. As a teacher, my students keep me alive and appreciate them for the stimulation they provide. Well, we appreciate you as your previous student. I've always appreciated you, and I'm sure all your students appreciate your love and support during this time. And I hope you get back to face-to-face teaching soon, safely. Also hilarious, or says that we went from baking banana bread to defunding police within a few weeks, getting shit done during the pandemic. It blows my mind as to like how much has happened in this period of time. But I feel like for me, it's because it's felt like one very long day. So maybe I'm like my perception is messed up of how much is done. But well, generally the Black Lives Movement and everything that we've talked about right now has been so relevant, and so it's about time. It's about time that we've put our focus on something that is so important, and we're standing by a community that doesn't deserve to be treated this way. Nobody deserves to be treated this way, but this community has gone through so much, and I think anything we can do, no matter where we are in the world, to support them and and stand with them in solidarity. I think kudos to the fact that we waited for something so tragic and so many tragic events to happen for us to do this is what makes me really sad. But I'm happy that there's so many people standing up and doing what's right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible to see. And I think there's like I think it maybe one of the effects of the pandemic on that is because again, this is bringing it back to that closer to mortality piece. Well, what kind of world do we want? What kind of world do we want? And when you see like that, when a certain complacency is lifted because of the proximity to death, and you having to look inside and say, well, why am I choosing life? And what kind of life am I going to choose? That, and also being cooped up and stuck inside, and a lot more people's like kind of it was conducive to a movement, a mass consciousness about injustices that have been happening for time. And we're seeing it right now accelerated, with people out on the streets and demanding change in organizations, institutions. We're seeing that in the government of Canada, like major pushes, internal and external, and people taking it seriously. And a lot of people, saying to themselves, well, what kind of life do I really want? And I think that's very powerful.
Now this is either my mom's question or my dad's, I'm not sure, but a question from a senior citizen: are young people like you guys rejigging how to live life now that COVID has exposed its soft underbelly? What say you, Maseh?
A wise man would say no, and that they recognized it from the beginning that they were always just free to choose. But I'm not a wise man. I think it's very much exposed to me. Like I needed this in a sense to reevaluate more sincerely what I really want. And you get lost when you keep accepting a means for an end, and you keep accepting means for ends until it gets to a point where you're kind of entrenched in the weeds and you can't see those ends anymore. You're just like, I need to do this. I need to get schooling for this, to get to this position, to get to this job, to get this to this stage, to get to that stage. And you have all of these things in place that align with what the system offers you. And yet, when it's suddenly like the almost not the meaninglessness of it, but the frailty of it all becomes apparent, it's really uncomfortable. And it makes you ask yourself, What do I want to do? And I think we're answering that question collectively right now when it comes to things like BLM, when it comes to BIPOC representation, when it comes to indigenous rights, when it comes to ourselves and the way we carry ourselves personally and with our friends and families. I think it's definitely been changing us, and I think it's hard to tell exactly how yet. I think we're in the midst of it. We're literally playing it out. Yeah. What about you, Milo?
I mean, like, I feel like to answer that, I think on a personal level, like for me, being at home, I feel like I've been reenacting Home Alone, minus like thieves trying to break in and all that whipped cream and candy floating around. Um, like being here, like, alone for like over 100 days. I haven't met like a single friend. Like my family's on the other side of the world, just like worrying about them and worrying about what's going on. I think like, truly, I feel like I'm living one moment to the next. And like that has given me such clarity in the sense of what I need and what I want to do. And like it's I think it's amazing how it took a pandemic for us to reevaluate our lives and actually just, so I feel like as a society, and I feel like I could talk about the global society, like we always feel like, what are you doing in your life? Like, what is your plan? Like, where are you going? Like how productive have you been? Like, what can I achieve today? And like, what more can I do? And like, we forget like the basic things that should be important in our lives, like whether it's spending time with family or reconnecting with yourself, and even mental health, for example, we're so busy trying to like put all these things on ourselves, and we wait for that time till we like totally have like multiple breakdowns until we actually deal with something. Whereas over here, we've come face to face, as I see it, with our inner demons, like, but I think we've also come face to face with our inner strengths. um, and I think it's much needed, and like, I don't know about you, Maseh, like, but for me, like this overwhelming, I live every day with like an overwhelming sense of paranoia, thanks to like a lot of anxiety and other mental health issues. But that's made me reevaluate like what I want from life, and what it means to just be alive. And like for me, like I miss my friends, I miss my family, but I think most of all, I just miss the idea of being free in my space without that constant sense of what's going to happen next. Like, am I going to get COVID? Should I touch this? Should I touch that? And I think I needed that kind of like eye opening to feel this way, for me to be able to deal with myself on a core level.
Yeah, I hear that. The idea of like, for me, building back better really resonates. And when we're thinking about how to, recreate our society, one of the ways is, seeing, like, reevaluating how we're spending our time and how we organize ourselves and what we're spending our time thinking about. What are we spending our emotional energy on? Who are we trying to impress? You know, what are we creating? I found that this time has also been one for creative expression through, even if it's just baking, like, and I'm not gonna say just baking, it's baking some hard work. That is some hard work baking. God damn. I can show you my muffin tin, but I don't want to. Um, like that, these are all creative outlets that, people are taking on that they might never have done before. And it's bittersweet for people who are working remotely because you get to be with your family. Like it brought me back to my family. I was living in Ottawa, but then I went back to Toronto, and just being with family, and I haven't been with family for that long in a while. And I'm hearing that from a lot of colleagues who are spending time with family. It's difficult to focus while at home, but it's also rewarding to be with family, to be with our kids, to be with the little ones.
I
Ursh
I
says,
miss loving up on my friends, but another thing I'm realizing is that I'm quite happy spending time with myself. I get tired talking to people now for a prolonged period of time. I get you. Like, I think I've not lived at home or in like a conventional space in that sense since I was about like, what, 12, 13 years old. So I'm used to spending a lot of time on my own, but I feel uh, the sense of silence that I felt in the past, like I didn't know that I could deal with. Now like I see myself being able to do this for an extended period of time, and I'm not fazed by it at all. If like long time ago, if somebody had said you have to go without seeing anybody for like months, like I would have probably cried. And I feel now I'm like, okay, just moving on from one moment to the next. What about you, Maseh? Like, I know that your mom is at the front line, so what has that been like?
It's stressful because she's working at a long-term care home, and she's a nurse, and she's had to get tested multiple times, and you really see a lot of the cracks in how the healthcare system is organized, just from the things that my mom has told me about her experiences. And it weighs on the family, and it weighs on yourself, and your actions suddenly are not only affecting you, but it can affect your family, and it can affect the elderly people that my mother interacts with, and it could kill them. It could end their lives like this, especially if it spreads. So there's that added weight for the families, for the individuals, the fear. I think that one of the most challenging parts has been with family back in Kabul, and how COVID has been spreading in Afghanistan in particular, and in other countries, developing countries around the world, because it's just a catastrophe. There's just no capacity. A lot of actually, I think last time I checked, over 40 doctors had passed away because of COVID. And they're literally risking their lives almost for nothing. People are just like dying. There's nothing that can be done. And this again brings me back to that dissonance between kind of where I come from and where I'm at, especially when it's affecting family. And my grandmother is in Kabul, and uh, it's scary. It's really hard. It's really difficult. There's no words for it. But I think it's telling, and I think it's just I'm trying to use it in the only meaningful way that I can, which is holding to the need to reimagine a better world after, um, and to like we need to, even though it seems impossible, even though there's antagonists like Trump or other populist leaders, right-wing leaders that are looking inside. We need to be able to like transcend that. And on an individual level, you see through a lot of the antics of like supporting our heroes. I think it's well intentioned, but it also distracts, from a lot of issues for why long-term care homes, cause people, like that's where the highest concentration of deaths are. The highest percentages of deaths are there. Yeah, it's hard.
And then Ursha said, and I don't know if that's because there's a veil that's been exhausting or if it's because of Zoom burnout. I think
Screens.
Yeah, I think I was just having this conversation with somebody else a couple of days ago. I think the balance between screen time and real time has actually become a huge factor. I think like the recognition of how often we live in this other world, this other zone. Um, and I think for a lot of people that I've spoken to, that's been a true struggle. Um, I think to develop that kind of balance, and also I think it's tiring just being so put together, or looking so put together, because you get so much judgment, right? Like, oh, what are you wearing? Or are you still in your sweatpants at this hour? Like, whatever. Versus just accepting that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to just be in whatever space that you are, like, and being who you are. And I feel for some people, I feel like they've come to acknowledge that, and some people are still far away from that acknowledgement, that to just let people be. So yeah, I think what we can say is
Mm-hmm.
hope for a better, like, like that people will understand each other better. And I hope that that kind of
Mm-hmm.
understanding that we've been talking about with other communities and stuff that Ryan said before, that I hope that this carries on further, and it just doesn't come to a standstill at the end of the pandemic, right? Like that people remember that
Mm-hmm.
we need to stick by each other and for what's right, and for what we need to do for not only ourselves as people, but also for nature and for the world and general development. And yeah,
Mm.
there's been a shout out to you,
It's
Nancy.
one of those like lasting memories.
Thank you for sharing
Oh,
your personal story and thoughts about Afghanistan and other developing countries. Developed countries need to do more to support developing countries.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
I
definitely a
yeah,
shout out, man.
and not for everybody, right? For everybody, like we need to like not just this isn't an act of charity. This is for everybody. If you don't help out everybody, if you don't make this vaccine accessible to everyone, nobody's safe. Because again, the disease, the one benefit one of the main benefits we have over the virus, literally, we're talking humans versus coronavirus, is our ability to communicate
Mm-hmm.
and trust each other. And if you can trust each other and you can work together, the pandemic would have been solved a long time. It would have been prevented. If we're not intruding into, uh, if we're not diminishing biodiversity, if people are not in poverty, if people don't have to rely on, going into uh, wild spaces and you know, to, for a livelihood, and people are supported in I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I know that if there's better cooperation, we would be having less of a risk of these kind of pandemics in the future.
I don't think anybody knows, and I think that we need to start with that acknowledgement that I don't know. I don't think anybody anywhere knows what that looks like or what that's going to look like. But I
Hmm.
think it's want to take a step, a positive step in that direction. I think that's what like that's what needs to be done by everybody, and it's not just on the larger scale of governments and corporations and stuff like that. It's all of us, like average human beings, doing that
Mm.
for each other.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Milo, what would you say is kind of one thing that like what is your prediction for, after this pandemic has
Mm.
passed? What is one thing that I mean, you mentioned what you hope for, but what's something that you hope doesn't happen? Is there a negative outcome that could come after this pandemic is over?
I think the most negative thing that can come out of this pandemic is something that I touched upon very briefly before, is regressing into what we were before. Whether it's not
Hmm.
only in terms of all these like major, very important movements that we've been having, like BLM, um, or the fact that communities have come together all over the world, but I think regressing into our old ways of life, of over, like, whether it's personally, of ignoring mental health, or over like bogging ourselves with all these like judgments and things that society doesn't allow us in a lot of ways. We feel like we can't be that. It's a sign of weakness, um,
Yeah.
or like regressing into that state of that rat race of like, oh, how much do we produce, and like that the commerciality of it all, whereas um, just taking care of nature and being one with the nature, the universe, and your space and your mind, body, and soul, like looking out for it. And I think that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about it like on a personal level too, of what's going to happen after. What about you? Like, what do you think
Mm.
about this? We have about
Can I?
just under 2 minutes left. So
Okay, maybe can I finish with this
yes.
story? Okay. The Man Who Was Aware of Death by Idris Shah. It's not his story, but he collected the story. There was once a dervish who embarked upon a sea journey. As the other passengers in the ship came aboard one by one, they saw him and, as is the custom, asked him for a piece of advice. All the dervish would do was to say the same thing to each one of them. He seemed merely to be repeating one of those formulas which each dervish makes the object of his attention from time to time. The formula was, try to be aware of death until you know what death is. Few of the travelers felt particularly attracted to this admonition. Presently a terrible storm blew up. The crew and the passengers alike fell upon their knees, imploring God to save the ship. They alternately screamed in terror, gave themselves up for lost, hoped wildly for succor. All this time the dervish sat quietly, reflective, reacting not at all to the movement and the scenes which surrounded him. Eventually, the storm stopped. The sea and sky were calm, and the passengers became aware of how serene the dervish had been throughout the episode. One of them asked him, "Did you not realize that during this frightful tempest there is nothing more solid than a plank between us all and death?" "Oh yes, indeed," answered the dervish. "I knew that at sea it is always thus. I also realized, however, that I had often reflected when I was on land that, in the normal course of events, there is even less between us and death." I won't even say anything about it. I think I'll just kind of, for those who are present listening to it, I'll just leave it as kind of like you fill that space between us, however you see fit. But that story really stayed with me. And I tried to, like, that was the best way I could capture it, like what's going on for me.
And kind of brings us back to how we started, which was about how this pandemic has brought us a sense of collective reminder and awareness of mortality and the role that it plays in our lives. Um,
It was written in the 9th century by, I think his name is Bayazid of Istam,
mm-hmm.
who was a Sufi mystic. Um, and it goes to show that even 1,100 years ago, the exact same concept is timeless. It's universal, and I think there's something about that. There's a reassurance of that a lot has happened since then, and this seems like the end of the world, but it's just another like blink.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something very, very refreshing about that.
I don't know about for anybody else, but I think for me, um, this conversation brought me a lot of sense of learning and growth, and I'm hoping that it brought, if not new information, but also a sense of hope or a sense of wanting to know more about what's going on in the world. And yeah, everybody else who has been a part of this journey with us today, thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm sounding like Maseh now, but I honestly
Thank you.
really, really, really appreciate you. Love you too, Erita. Thank you for joining us. And yeah.
Thank you again, Rahan. I see that you just joined in right now. And thank you, Milo, for the opportunity. This is cool. This is a lot of fun. Time went like that. And
Yes,
just
it really
seeing the
did.
reflections, and
Yeah,
I love to hear myself talk. So
you do.
thanks for
You do. You do.
that.
And
Thanks,
for
Milo.
everybody who hasn't checked it out yet, please do check out Maseh's podcast, DeepTox.co. Did I get that right? DeepTox. Yes.
You did.
I think you've done what, like 13 episodes so far?
12. I think 11 so far.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Clearly,
I
I
think
overestimated it. And
maybe 12.
there it is in the chat below. Do check it out. I'm not saying this with bias, but it's opened my mind to a lot of things since he started. And see, TV confirms that the podcast is lit. And
Thank you.
I appreciate you, Maseh, a lot
Mhm.
for being here today and See, so much support for your podcast. Um,
Thanks,
and,
guys. My only
and
listeners. Yeah.
I
Thank you, everyone.
appreciate you for taking out this time and for being here today and sharing your thoughts with us and your journey with us.
Hmm.
And also appreciate you as a friend for being around for the past
Thank you, Mona.
few months of this pandemic. And yes, um, good vibes to you, good vibes to everybody else who's listening, and stay tuned. And until then,
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Milo.
bye.
Bye bye.